afternoon, good evening, wherever part of the world you're from. Welcome to this session in Students in VR. This session is called Life in Lockdown, a student's view from within VR. My name is Tim Jackson. I work at Broadstairs College. A little bit more about me in just a moment. And I'm very fortunate today to have with me three of my student colleagues who are studying with me on the HND in Computing Year 2. So they're level 5 students. And I'll tell you a little bit more about those guys in just a minute. So today's session, we've chosen the Moonbase because the Moonbase is a bespoke area that was developed for educators in VR by the team at Engage, and Chris Madsen and his team have done an amazing job. So we thought we might as well use it and bring in some coffee cups and some sofas and sort of have a bit of a chill session and tell you a little bit about what we're doing at Broadstairs College with my students and really how COVID-19 has affected their learning. Okay, so hopefully you should all be able to see the presentation behind me. And what I'd like to do is just start off with maybe 10 or 15 minutes telling you a little bit about who we are and what we do and why we've done what we've done. And then for the next sort of 15 minutes or so after that, I'm going to be having like a discussion session with my students, asking them questions. And really what we're trying to do is to find out how they feel about all of this and how they feel it's affected their learning. And I said, I'm very fortunate to have three of my students with me today. Okay, so we'll go straight to the presentation now. So you can see my name is Tim Jackson. I'm the Program Director for Higher Education for Computing specifically at Broadstairs College, which is part of the EKC group based in Kent, which is in the United Kingdom. So for us, it's 12:30 midday, and depending on where you are will depend on what time it is for you. But welcome to all of you, and I'm very, very happy to see you all here today. So this is really what I want to cover with this presentation. I've called it Welcome to a New Way of Learning. And this is based on the very, very first presentation I did with my students in VR when we first went into lockdown sort of at the end of March. And this was one of the first slides I showed them. Welcome to a new way of learning. And this is really what we're trying to embrace with virtual reality in education. And really the idea of today's session is it's a student panel based discussion, okay, on the use of virtual reality technologies for a whole range of topics and lessons that they're learning as part of their higher national diploma in computing during this current lockdown regime. And there are quite a range of topics that they're covering. So for example, we have project management, robotics, network management. So you can see it's quite a wide range. In addition with games design, games development. This isn't just your, standard university theoretical based topics. Because it's a HND, it's very hands-on, it's very practical. And that in itself has brought some challenges with it that we're looking at the moment as to how we're going to do that. So some of it we've been able to, some of it we haven't. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. So the four key areas I wanted just to go through with you as far as this presentation is concerned is basically telling you who are we, who are the people that kind of make up this crazy world of students in VR, but based at Broadstairs College. And then I suppose I'm asking like a really obvious question. Why are we here? What was the whole point? And what was it that got us into VR in the first place? And what are we doing sat here today? Next point is, well, what were we trying to do and what are we still trying to do? Because I think our focus is shifting a little bit because there is a clear indication from the UK government, we believe that's going to be announced on Sunday, that there will be a partial lifting of the lockdown. We don't know how yet, but we're kind of getting ready for that and seeing how we can engage our learners still. And then the last thing I want to look at is, well, who was involved in this process? And you'll be surprised about the number of people who were involved. Okay, so to start off with, who are we? Well, I've told you who I am. Tim Jackson, the Program Director for Higher Education. So HE is the term we use an awful lot, but it means higher education. And higher education in the UK means anything post-college. So it would be people who have completed advanced level study in computing or whatever topic and want to go on and do a degree level study. So the HNC and the HND are equivalent to the first year for HNC and the first 2 years of HND for a degree. So the chaps who you can see sitting on your right hand side here all have the opportunity. They've done 2 years with me. They can then go on and do a further year at a local university or further apart if they want to do 1 more year, and they will get a full degree as well. So they would have their HND and a BSc in computing or network engineering or whatever it is they wanted to do. So in the same 3-year period, they would end up with 2 qualifications. And that's the beauty of the HND and what we do at Broadstairs College. So that's me. I'm the guy who runs the show, I guess, and I'm responsible for whatever happens to these students. So the guys who are sat with me today, they're here because I asked them very nicely to, and they were very kindly offered. And we have George and James and Arta. And all 3 of these guys are HND Year 2 computing students. They are level 5, which basically means that at the end of this year, they would have studied the first 2 years of a degree, and they have the option to go on and do the last year of a degree if they choose to. So that's who's with us today. We are all based at Broadstairs College in Kent, and that's in the United Kingdom. And Broadstairs College is just one of the campuses that's part of the EKC group. And the EKC group is a college of further and higher education. So the students that we teach can range anywhere from school level. So we have our own junior school, which takes 14 to 16-year-olds, all the way through to level 1 and level 2, which is sort of students whose GCSE grades perhaps weren't as good as they could have been and they want to improve. We have GCSE students, and then we have level 3, and level 3 are more advanced students who have done very well at school and want to do A-level study. Then we move on to higher education, which is where we come in, and higher education is part of that process as well. So we cover levels 1 all the way through to level 5. In fact, a number of students who are sat on the couch with us today have made that journey with us at the college. They didn't come in at level 3, they came in at a lower level and made their way through. And in fact, one student in particular has been with us for a number of years, and it will be his last year with us. And I know that he is equally sad as we are, because he's become part of the furniture, a little bit like the sofas that you can see. Okay, so Broadstairs College is a college of further and higher education, and we are across several campuses. There's 6 campuses now. We were 5, we're now 6 campuses, part of the EKC group. So we're quite a large college in Kent. So why are we here? Okay, really dumb question, I know, bit of an obvious one, but we all know why we're here, because of the coronavirus, also known as COVID-19. However it happened, why it happened, where it started is immaterial. The fact it's happening to us now is the thing. And it's been devastating for the world. It's been devastating for everybody. And one of the things we want to talk about today is not just the effect on studies, but the effect on students' mental health as well, and how it's affected them being stuck inside and not being able to go anywhere. And has this been able to help at all? So we've all been in self-isolation for a variety of periods of time. So many of us live with families, some of us live on our own, some of us are perfectly healthy, some of us are not so healthy and are classified as vulnerable, which means you have a pre-existing medical condition or you have no immune system whatsoever. And a very dear friend of mine is in that category, you know, that causes a problem for them. So self-isolation is a real issue. So along with that, we had government restrictions. So we had the virus, the fact we had to self-isolate, and then the government came along and said, hey, guess what, guys, you're not going anywhere for at least a month and a half. So since, well, I guess it was the end of March, really, we have all been in isolation. We've all been very restricted as to where we could go and what we could do. And we're talking maybe 6 or 7 weeks now. And as I said earlier on, there may be a chance that this is going to change in the next sort of few days. And we hope that over the coming months, whilst we won't go back to normality as we know at the moment, we hope to go back to some form of normality that will allow us to lead our daily lives and at some point maybe feel normal to us. So government restrictions are being reviewed every 3 weeks, and we will wait and see what happens with the next review, and that will be announced on Sunday here in the UK. Now, the other reason why we're here, so yes, the virus, yes, self-isolation, yes, because the government told us to, but here's the thing, we still have work to do, okay? We were like 2/3 of the way through the course when the coronavirus hit. You can't just stop and say, okay, never mind, right, well, what should we do now? Twiddle our thumbs, or, hey, you know, let me give you something to read and tell me what you think about it. Okay, well, I'm just going to be bored as anything now, and I'm going to be even more bored because I'm reading stuff. The beauty about a HND qualification is it's hands-on, it's practical, it's interesting, it's engaging, and we had to somehow keep that focus alive. We still had to keep those practical elements, and we still needed to keep the students engaged. Excuse the pun, because we're engaged. The end of the academic year for higher education is the end of June. So when we got hit by the virus at the end of March, you know, we still had April, May, and June to go. That's a significant period of time in education, as I'm sure you all know. And that meant we still had work to do. And by the way, we still have work to do, because these guys are still working on assessments, they're still working their socks off, and we are still arranging for practical sessions for them to be involved in. So how are we doing this? Well, we're using a combination of VR technologies, primarily the Engage platform, which is where we are today, and AltSpace VR, which is the other platform that we're using as part of Students in VR. So AltSpace sessions were yesterday, Engage sessions are today. We're also using something called Moodle. Now, Moodle is a virtual learning environment, and essentially what that is, it's a website where all of our resources on there, all of the links, any resources we think students will need to know about, we put onto Moodle so they can access them. If they're doing any assessments, they upload them to Moodle, so there is no paperwork at all. So whilst the HND isn't a distant learning course, we are able to adapt very, very quickly to online learning because of the way that we've always done this. We've always used Moodle for submitting assignments. I don't remember the last time I took a paper-based assignment from a student. My goodness, years ago. I like to breathe far too much, and cutting trees down is not a good thing. So Moodle is also part of this because it allows students to have that normality. Where do I get lesson resources? On Moodle. Where do I upload my assignments? Moodle. So we wanted to keep some level of normality in terms of the resources we were using. So Moodle was a big part of that. And also a program called ProMonitor. And ProMonitor is the system, it's a student database system that we use to track and monitor our students, both from a pastoral point of view, making sure that they're okay, but also from a academic perspective. So it's where we track their grades, and that's what we're doing at the moment. So really the only difference between what we were doing and what we are doing now is the fact that I'm not seeing the students face to face as such. I'm seeing them avatar to avatar. So we're in VR. Okay, and that's really where our main difference is. So what were we trying to do? What are we trying to do? I think this has probably become quite obvious now. We were trying to continue with the HE studies. We were trying to make sure that those units were still readily accessible, that we still had resources available for students. Already these guys have given presentations in VR for exercises we've been working on to help them with their assessments. So we've carried on doing that. Okay, we wanted to ensure that the students could still complete their course and progress on to where they wanted to go next, which could be university to do year 3. It could be they wanted to go into employment. It could be they want to work for themselves. Whatever their options were, those options are still valid and they're still live. So nobody has had to change their decision as to what they want to do next. Okay, so that was a real key indicator for us. And of course, another thing is that the students were still able to achieve the best possible grades. And for me, this is probably the main focus. When students come into my class, I want them to learn, I want them to engage, I want them to be interested, because I want them to do well, get the best grades they possibly can get. For some people, that'll only be a pass. For other people, it'll be a merit. For other people, it'll be distinction. We all have our different levels. We all have our different plateaus. Point is, using the VR technologies, we were still able to achieve that. Okay. Of course, from a course perspective, we needed to make sure that we were meeting TLA objectives, TLA meaning teaching, learning and assessments for each subject. So each subject has criteria attached to them where our awarding body says your student has to prove this in order to get a particular criteria. Well, we still had to make sure we could do that. We still had to make sure we put those resources in place. And of course, from an Ofqual QAA perspective, which are the governing bodies to make sure that we do what's supposed to be done, we need to make sure that we're maintaining the quality of provision and delivery. So we are still doing everything we can, making sure the students can still achieve. And it's all about maintaining standards. Okay, you know, all because we're in VR doesn't make it a HE course anymore. In fact, being in VR and doing what we're doing really does reinforce the fact it's a HE course, and it's been an amazing adventure for all of us, I feel. So who was involved? Well, okay, me, I guess. I've been the driving force behind what we've been doing here at the college, because I'm the program director. I'm responsible for it. I'm the one who had to make the decisions. So it was important that I acted very, very quickly. What was interesting is that VR is something I've been involved for 14, 15 months now. I've been inspired by the work from my colleagues in Educators in VR and the fantastic summit that we had in February 2020, of which I was a part of. And that inspired me to think, well, can we do that with our students for normal lessons? Okay, now this was a vision by a guy called Chris Long, an amazing guy. I never had the pleasure of meeting him, but many of my colleagues did. And he had this vision of being able to do exactly that, using VR to reach out to people around the world and making education accessible. And I'm hoping that today, we're able to discuss and show to you actually that we are well on the way to living the dream that Chris Long first visualized many years ago. He's not with us any longer, unfortunately. He passed away recently, but I hope he's looking down now and watching us and saying, hey guys, let's just go for it. So I was behind this idea of running VR courses at the college. But I had other staff helping me. So we have ALSPs, ALSPs, and they are academic learning support practitioners. So I can be supporting the students, but I have an academic member of staff working with me who will support them with their reports, with their presentations, with their structuring, with their research, whatever it is. I have other members of staff on call who can step in and support the students as we would in a standard classroom. That's the whole point I want to make here, as we would in a standard classroom. Of course, I couldn't do any of this if it wasn't for my students. And it's my level 4 HNC and HND year 1 students and my level 5 HND year 2 students in computing. And so 3 of my colleagues here today are all HND year 2 students. And I couldn't do what I do if it wasn't for them. So, you know, kudos to them. They've been amazing. They've adjusted so quickly. And it's quite interesting, and hopefully, you know, my colleagues will talk about this in a moment. It's quite interesting how quickly they adapted to life in VR, and how quickly we were able to settle in and get on with the lessons. I also had a camera bot with me for recording the sessions because it was very important that I was able to share those sessions with the students so they could read them, look at them, reflect on them. But it was also for my development as well. I needed to be able to sit and look at myself and think, Tim, you're waffling too much. Probably a little bit like I'm doing now. But it's interesting watching yourself on stage or in an environment like this and saying, hey, do you know, that's just awesome. Or, hey, try this next time. Was there anybody else involved? Well, kind of like not really. They were private sessions. So any of the sessions we were having were by invite only. And I did invite a number of my colleagues from Educators in VR, and a number of people did come in and observe some of the sessions and really enjoyed what they were looking at. And I've got another 2 colleagues who would like to come in and look at some sessions over the next couple of weeks. So I do believe that people are interested in what we're doing, but they are private sessions because I wanted to make sure that the students felt comfortable about who was in the room and what we were doing. Just out of point of interest, for every single session that I had in Engage, I had at least 3 or 4 people from around the world wanting to join us. Who expressed an interest to be with us. Unfortunately, there were private sessions, so I wasn't able to do that, but it was interesting that people wanted to. Which kind of brings us to where we are now and what we're going to do next. So essentially, George, James and Arta wanted to share their experiences with you of being in VR and how it impacted on their learning and how they adjusted to things. And whether it's made an impact at all. So I've called it the good, the bad and the ugly. And I'd just like to point out, I am not talking about the students in this respect. I'm talking about the good and the bad and the ugly in terms of their experiences. Okay, because these guys, of course, never good, bad. Well, they're not bad and ugly. They're certainly very good. So what I'm saying is there's no holes barred. We will tell you exactly what we feel and what we think about it. There's no point sitting here saying, yeah, everything's fantastic, because perhaps not everything is, and they're the things we need to work on. If I can ask you to leave questions to the very end, we'll have a period of maybe 5 minutes or so of questions at the end if you wanted to ask anything, because I'm very mindful of the time that we have. Okay, so at this stage, we're going to move to the panel. So I'm going to become question master now. So we have George and Arta and James who are with us. And I suppose really what I want to say to the guys is, how has this been for you? So I'm going to start off with George, if that's okay. And George, what I want to ask you is, obviously this is a very different change to what we would normally do in our labs at the classes, because you would see each other physically. You could physically touch the resources. So being in VR, how have you felt about that? How have you adjusted in terms of being in lessons?
I personally have felt that this has been the best alternative we could have done. It's obviously not been face-to-face in person. However, I found this to be better than if we were to, say, do a video call, because there is something physical in front of us that we can see that represents the person in a 3D space rather than a more often than not 2D space. It's been...
Right. So is the context very important to you then, that you can actually see
Yes.
that you're sat on a sofa, you can see a mug of coffee in front of you, you can see other people in an audience around us? Is that quite an important thing for you then?
Yes, it is. I've personally found, because obviously we are in an environment we can sit next to each other, all that sort of stuff, it's made transition to this feel a lot less jarring than it would have been if we had done some other method.
Right. So would you, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm going to use the word realism. Do you feel it's more of a realistic representation, even though you're an avatar,
Yes.
even though you're not a person as such, it is a representation of you, and you feel that that's more realistic for you then?
Yes, 100% more realistic.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Thank you, George. I'll come back to you again in just a minute, if that's okay.
Yep.
Arta, if I can come to you next, if that's okay. Arta, How have you felt about moving into VR? Do you feel that it's affected your studies in any way, or do you feel that you've been able to carry on? Or how do you feel about moving into VR? Has it affected your studies?
I didn't really feel any different to being in real life in virtual reality. I adapted quickly
Okay.
to the virtual environment, and also felt I would have felt being in a physical environment, because VR made a really successful mimic of the physical classroom that we had. So yeah.
Because I suppose you were able to see your colleagues around you, I guess.
Sorry?
So you were able to see that your colleagues were around you. You know. So like you're sat now, you're sat in a 3. So
Yeah.
you couldn't do that in Zoom or in Skype. You know, you're looking at someone face to face in the screen, but you've got this context going on. So did that help you transition more quickly then?
Yeah, it did, because I felt my colleagues around me, and I wouldn't be able to do that, for example, in Zoom, as I didn't really have that feature inside it, as VR
Right.
has.
So, I mean, I'll just explain at this moment, actually, that the guys are in 2D, as you can probably tell, because their arms are straight down by the sides. They're using laptops that were provided by the college as part of their course. We made sure that everybody had a laptop to make sure that everybody had an equal chance of participating in. We do that anyway in higher education. We're not doing it just because of the situation we're in at the moment. We did that. These guys have had these laptops for the last 18 months. They had them at the beginning of their studies 18 months ago. And actually, I'm really glad we did, because if we didn't, we probably wouldn't be able to do what we're doing now. We would end up excluding somebody by accident, because we can't assume everyone's got equipment at home. So that was a good thing. And I think having that resource already with you and being able to adapt to VR so quickly meant that you felt more comfortable about things, Arthur.
Yeah.
Okay. One more question before I go on to James.
Mhm.
Do you feel that your grades could be compromised because we've gone into VR?
No, I certainly did not think that my grades would be compromised, as we still get the education that we would have gotten in the classroom. So
Right. Okay. That's interesting. So you don't feel worried about it at all, or?
no, I'm not worried about my grades being compromised at all.
Good. Okay. I mean, that's what I was hoping you were going to say, because that is the idea, that we don't compromise anything, which is what I was
Yeah.
saying earlier on. But it's good to hear that you feel that, because for us, that's incredibly important, that you're able to carry on and do what you're doing without interruption. Okay. Thank you, Arta. Let's move on to James. James, again, I suppose similar sort of question. We moved into VR very, very quickly. So, you know, we were in class with each other, I think, on the Thursday, and we had our first VR session the following Monday morning.
Yeah.
How did you feel about doing that so quickly?
For me, I feel it was quite good that we had this solution in place and we could set up into VR classes really quickly.
Right.
compared to other universities where their courses have been kind of written off. They've been told to just watch videos, where we've been getting you to interact with us still and get
Right.
proper education.
So if I told you to do that, just go off and watch a video or go and read an article and write something about it, how would you feel about that as difference to what we're doing now?
I feel if you did that and we had this solution ready, I would feel that it was like you don't care if you just told us to go and watch a video, read a book, or something like that.
Right.
And compared to if we have this, it shows you really do care about your students and you want us to achieve so much.
Oh, that's interesting. That's very true, actually. And you know, I do care about you guys a
Yeah.
lot. And it does take a lot of work to set all of this up, of course, but it's worth it. And it's worth it because you guys are sitting there saying, hey, this is working for us.
Yeah.
So again, it's quite interesting that you're saying that you are able to engage into the environment much more quickly. So let me ask you something slightly different, James, then.
Right.
If I said to you, okay, I'm going to send you an email with an exercise in that means you need to go and read something, or you need to go and investigate something and write a short paper on it. Let's say we get to 8:30 on a Monday morning.
Yep.
And you know you've got that piece of work to do. What's going to happen at 8:30 on Monday morning if I sent you an email saying, go and do this work? And be honest about it.
At 8:30, I'd still be in bed if it's like how it is at the moment. But if I was up, I would probably choose not to do it for a few hours and leave it until like last minute.
Okay, now the reason I've said that, the reason I've used those timings is actually because our sessions on Monday mornings start at 9 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And you know, whether you roll out of bed at 8:30 in the morning or what, I don't know. That's up to you. But by 9 o'clock, you are ready to go and you're ready to learn.
Yeah.
Now, on Monday mornings, when we get to 8:30, what are you doing? Now that we're in VR, what are you doing at 8:30 on a Monday morning?
I'm already up and probably having breakfast at that point.
Right.
And just getting ready for these VR classes.
Right, so booting up your laptop and getting ready to go.
Yeah, essentially.
Okay. And how long do you spend with me on a Monday morning, James? Or on a Monday?
It's 9 o'clock till about 4-ish, I think.
That's right. So these guys are with me from 9 o'clock till 4 o'clock. There are breaks in between, by the way. Let me just point that out. There are breaks. But from 9 o'clock till 4 o'clock on a Monday, all day, and we are looking at different variety of topics. And do you know what? And I'm going to say this now before I go back to George and ask him another question. The level of attendance has improved. We are almost at 100% attendance for every single VR session that we have. Now, these guys' attendance is actually pretty awesome. They're probably round about the 90 to 95% mark. Okay, so they are there the majority of the times. But I did have an instance once of a student who wasn't feeling very well, but he still came to the class in VR because although he wasn't well enough to, in the real world, come to class, in VR, he was able to boot up his laptop and still engage with the session. And he said to me afterwards, Tim, I am so glad I was here because I would have missed so much. And although I wasn't well, I really wanted to be here. And VR gave him the opportunity to do that. And this is kind of, I think, where James is coming from as well, that it motivates him to be there because he knows he needs to be and he knows he wants to be.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Thank you very much, James. That was really interesting. George, can I just come back to you very quickly, talking about motivation now? Obviously, you enjoy being in the real world and you enjoy being in classes in our labs and everything. Do you feel any more or less motivated to be involved in your learning, having swapped to virtual reality?
I would say in virtual reality, I'd say the same level.
Right. So you're not. So if I was sending, like I said to James, if I'd sent you an email saying, "Oh, George, can you get on with this, please?" You know, you might put it off for a little bit. But because we're in VR, you're saying, hey, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be there on time. My attendance is going to be as awesome as it always is. You're not slacking. You're not turning up.
Yeah.
So motivationally, actually, it's for you, if I can sort of like paraphrase what you said.
Yeah.
It's as good as being in the real world in that respect.
I'd agree with that.
Right. Okay. Good. All right. Otter, one last question for you, if it's okay. We were talking about grades earlier on. We were talking about whether you felt it would impact on the grades. When you've been given work to do in a session like this, because we still have exercise work, we still have group work, we've tried to keep the normality as much as possible, okay? Do you feel that your level of work is worse, the same, or better because you're engaged in virtual reality?
I think it's exactly the same. There's no difference to how my work ethics changed.
Right. So your ethics is the same. You would still believe. So let's say, for example, what sort of give me an example of what sort of grades would you be aiming for? I mean, it's a bit unfair me asking you that, but what sort of thing would you aim for in an assessment?
I usually aim for the distinction.
Okay, which is good. I'm very happy to hear that. Do you feel being in VR then still gives you that opportunity to aim for those high grades that you want to?
Yeah, certainly, I do feel that way.
Okay, so what is it about being in VR, do you think, that allows you to still have that motivation?
Because I still feel the same as I would be in class. I still have my colleagues around me. I still have my lecturer, you, to help me with my education. And if I have any questions, I can still ask them while being in this session, for example.
So psychologically, for you, as long as you've got the environment around you that's familiar, as long as you've got the people around you who you would expect to be there, and you've got your support team like myself and Laura as the ALSP, for you, you still feel comfortable about it, and you still feel that you're able to achieve what you want.
Yeah, that's definitely how I feel.
Okay, well, that's really cool. I'm really happy to hear that. Really happy to hear that. Okay, thank you, Arthur. I really appreciate that. And James, just one more question for you, if that's okay. So, from a motivational aspect, so we're coming from this motivation again. Obviously, I've heard from the three of you today. You obviously talk to your colleagues in the class. You have group meetings. And by the way, I did forget to mention, and I should mention this now. We actually use Discord as one of our main communication techniques. So yes, we've got Moodle, but in terms of communicating with each other, in terms of having voice chats, in terms of having sharing resources through text-based channels, we use Discord. And we've actually got our own Teaching in HE Discord channel set up, and each levels 4 and 5 have their own areas, but they also have a joint area as well, a bit like a common room, if you like, where they're able to talk to each other, where they're able to share resources and swap ideas and all that sort of thing. So, you know, although I've got the three guys with me today, everybody knows this is going on today, and everybody had the opportunity to come along if they wanted to. And it was these three crazy guys who put their hands up and said, hey, okay, Tim, I'll come along because I want to tell people what I think. So James, let me quickly ask you, because you know you do talk to other members in the group. You're one of our reps, along with George and Wesley, who's not able to be with us here today. What do the rest of your colleagues think about this? Have you had any feedback from them?
I think from the rest of my colleagues, I think they like it as well, as we also get because we get interaction from you.
Right. Right. Okay. So that's quite interesting. So you're actually saying that other people in the group are feeling exactly the same as you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And is that sort of like a generalization that everybody feels the same?
Yeah, I think as far as I'm aware, everyone does feel the same about this.
Right. Okay. So just to finish off, because we're coming to the end of this student area, if you like, before we go to questions to the audience, is there anything else you want to tell the audience and tell them how you feel being in virtual reality has helped you or maintained your focus in relation to your studies on the HND program?
For me, I think it's the course is essentially going the same, it's just at a different location instead.
Right. Okay, so for you it's normal.
Yeah, essentially.
Okay. Arthur, did you want to add anything?
No, I think that James said stay the same, feel the same as well. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. But for you, you know, your grades are still as realistic as they were back in September when we started the second year.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
for sure.
Okay. I mean, for me, that's really important. I can't, you know, stress that enough. That's really important. But I'm glad that you feel like that. George, is there anything else you would like to add?
No, not that I can think of. It's been
No.
covered quite well.
Right. Okay. So, an interesting range of questions, I hope you think. I've tried to ask questions that have broadly tried to cover how I think a student would react or think about in instances like this. We've got just a few minutes left. So what is it, about 1:10 now? So yeah, we've got about 5 minutes left of the session. So I'd like to sort of offer the opportunity for anybody who would like to ask a question. And what I'll do, I haven't muted everybody, so you can unmute yourselves and ask a question if you would like to. Now would be the time to do it. So does anyone have a question for myself or my colleagues? Now that's Jay I can hear at the back. Hello, Jay. How are you, my friend?
Hi. I'm good, thank you. Just
Great.
wanted
What
to
would you
check-
like
sorry,
to ask?
Sorry, I joined the session a bit late, so I'm not sure if you covered students. Some are actually VR head with the computer, or are they?
You're breaking up a little bit, Jay, but I think what your question is, are they in VR headsets or are they on computers in 2D? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, I understand that they're in 2D, but
Yes.
in general, when you're teaching, do you have VR headsets as well?
Right. We do have VR headsets at the college. We don't have enough because I've got 17 in the group. So I don't have 17
Wow.
VR headsets at the moment. And my principal, Kurt Salter, is incredibly supportive of what we do. And he does try to open his budget to us as much as he possibly can. But if I ask him for 17 Quest headsets or 17 Go headsets, he'd probably laugh at me quite a bit. So we do have headsets. We do use them. We use them for specific things in class, but generally, if I'm doing any teaching, and we did actually start doing some teaching in VR, we tend to use it in a 2D environment, partly because of convenience and partly because of cost, as things stand at the moment.
Great, thank you.
You're very welcome. Anybody else like to ask a question to the students? Please feel free. Anybody would like to ask? Yep, Daniel, what would you like to ask? Mm-hmm. Yep. Boys, did you want to answer that?
I've personally tried this before in a VR headset. Yes. The experience was a little bit different, obviously, with being able to turn your head and move your arms and all that, but I haven't found it has made really, it's not affected me in my engagement, personally.
So, right, so you feel just as engaged in 2D as you do in 3D, George?
Yeah.
Right. So psychological context is very important for you, isn't it?
Yeah.
Interesting. Yes.
It would depend on the. Sometimes we'll be looking at pieces of work. However, there is often the ability for it to be on the board, like presentation up there. It'd only be rare circumstances I'd personally find that, but yeah. I feel like it would be at least 95% of the course. For me personally, I don't think it would matter whether being in a VR headset or the 2D. There'd only be very specific instances I'd personally find where having a VR headset or not would be more beneficial to that particular lesson.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That is a really, really good question. I think at the moment, because I know they're in 2D, I have that mindset of certain things will be represented in a particular way, that they may be limited in some ways, but also more functional in others. So, for example, the three guys today are co-hosts, so they can then play around with some of that equipment, maybe a little bit easier in 2D than they could in 3D, or maybe easier in 3D than they would in 2D. So yes, there is a certain element of I do change things slightly because I know all of them are in 2D. I think what would be interesting for me, and this is the point we're getting at now actually, Daniel, and that is that we are coming up to the last part of the course where there's a significant amount of practical work, and one of their units is robotics. Now, I'm pushing to get us back on campus because I've got £6,000 worth of robotics equipment I really would like to use. Equally, if we're not allowed to, I am at the moment trying to source virtual robotic equipment. Now, I know that if that was in a 3D environment, that would be more fun, more engaging, more easier to control because of the way that 3D headsets work, more so than in 2D where they're having to fiddle around with a keyboard and mouse. So I would definitely have a preference of moving over to 3D headsets for practical elements. Absolutely. You're welcome. You're very welcome. Right. Okay. I'd like to thank all of you for coming today. I'm hoping that you found the session interesting and informative, and hopefully you've been able to take some things away from today that maybe will inspire you or give you some ideas of things that you can do where you are based, either in schools or colleges or your places of work. Because remember, what I'm doing with these students is essentially training. Okay, and this can be applied not just to an academic environment, but within a commercial context as well. So training environments could also be using the same techniques that we are using in colleges and universities to teach guys like this to do well and to pick up key practical skills. That's really the important thing, is those practical skills. And if we can use VR to do that, as I was saying to Daniel a minute ago, I think then we will then have closed the circle, not just from the academic perspective, but from the true vocational, hands-on, practical aspects as well. And that's when you're going to see how radically different education could be with the use of virtual reality and augmented reality, actually, technologies. So I want to thank you for being here today. I would like to thank my 3 students, James, Arthur and George. Thank you so much for coming along today. I hope you've enjoyed the session as well. By the way, this is the first time they've ever done this. Okay, so hats off to you guys. Awesome job. Thank you so much. And thank you to Daniel also for organising the event and also for recording the session for us today. So thank you very much. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Daniel. Absolutely. One very quick thing which I forgot to mention is that one of my students, a level 5 student, is actually for his project doing research on how this is working for his colleagues. So he's actually running regular questionnaires every 4 weeks to see how students feel about being in Engage and in AltSpace. And he's writing the report up at the moment and going to share his results with us as well. And that's Wesley who's doing that. So that's going to be very, very interesting indeed as to what information he finds from that. Okay.
Okay, guys.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm having avatar problems. I just want to invite everybody to the social event that's happening next. This is me, Angelina, but I'm in a different avatar because I'm having.
Hey, Angelina.
Sorry, I'm jumping through headsets. There's a social event that'll be starting soon, so please come join us. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Now that you've done such a